In a world where royal protocol dictates every gesture, where cameras capture every breath, and where the weight of a crown can sometimes overshadow the beating of a human heart, there comes a moment that breaks through all pretense. A single embrace that speaks louder than any speech, a touch that conveys more than any official statement, and a farewell that reminds us that beneath the titles and ceremonies, love remains the most powerful force of all. This is the story of that moment when Prince William and Princess Catherine showed the world that even royalty must sometimes say goodbye to those they hold most dear. It's a story that began in the quiet corridors of Windsor Castle, unfolded under the watchful eyes of millions, and ended with a nation united in both sorrow and admiration for two people who chose love over protocol, humanity over tradition. What you're about to read isn't just another royal story. It's a testament to the power of genuine emotion in an age of manufactured moments. A reminder that the most profound gestures often come in the simplest forms, and proof that sometimes the most important thing a future king and queen can do is simply be human. The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose gardens below. The familiar routine of palace life continued around her, but today felt different. Today marked the beginning of what would become one of the most emotionally charged periods in recent royal history. 3 weeks earlier, Queen Elizabeth II had taken a sudden turn for the worse. What had begun as a minor respiratory infection had developed into something far more serious. The palace had initially maintained its characteristic discretion, releasing only carefully worded statements about the Queen's need for rest. But behind the ornate doors and heavy curtains of Windsor Castle, the reality was far more sobering. Catherine had always shared a special bond with her grandmother-in-law. From a moment she first nervously curtsied before the monarch as Prince William's girlfriend, through their wedding day, when the Queen had loaned her the Cartier halo tiara, to quiet afternoon teas where royal protocol gave way to genuine conversation between two women who understood the weight of public service. Their relationship had deepened into something truly meaningful. The Queen had taken Catherine under her wing in ways that surprised many courtiers. She had seen something in the young woman from Berkshire that reminded her of herself in her early days as a royal bride. Perhaps it was Catherine's natural grace under pressure, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, or simply her evident love for William and commitment to the institution they both served. Whatever it was, the Queen had made it clear that Catherine was not just welcomed into the family, she was cherished. Now, as Catherine prepared for what everyone knew would be among their final conversations, the weight of that relationship pressed heavily on her heart. She had been by the Queen's bedside numerous times over the past weeks, sometimes with William, sometimes alone, sharing stories and memories that would never make it into any official biography. The Queen, despite her frailty, had maintained her characteristic wit and wisdom until the very end. She had used these private moments to share insights about royal life that couldn't be found in any handbook or protocol manual. She spoke of the loneliness that could come with the crown, the importance of maintaining one's sense of self amid constant scrutiny, and the delicate balance between duty and personal happiness. The secret, she had whispered to Catherine just days before, her voice thin but her eyes still bright with intelligence, is to remember that you serve something greater than yourself, but you must never lose yourself in that service. The people don't just need a princess, they need a person they can believe in. Catherine had treasured these conversations, knowing they were gifts of immeasurable value. The Queen was passing down not just practical knowledge, but emotional wisdom earned through 7 decades of service. These weren't lessons that could be taught in formal training sessions. They were the kind of understanding that came only from lived experience. Prince William had watched his wife navigate this difficult period with a mixture of admiration and concern. He knew how deeply Catherine had come to love his grandmother, and he could see the emotional toll of watching such a vital woman gradually fade. At the same time, He was struck by how naturally Catherine had stepped into the role of emotional support for the entire family. She had been the one to suggest that the younger grandchildren should have special time with their great-grandmother while they still could. She had organized informal gathering sessions in the Queen's private sitting room, where Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis could simply spend time with her without the weight of formal occasions. She understood instinctively that these children needed their own memories of their great-grandmother as a person, not just as a historical figure. The ripple effects of Catherine's influence extended beyond the immediate family. Palace staff, many of whom had served the Queen for decades, found themselves comforted by the Princess of Wales's presence during this difficult time. She had a gift for acknowledging people's emotions without being overly sentimental, for showing genuine care without making others feel they needed to manage her feelings in return. Mrs. Henderson, the Queen's longtime dresser, would later recall how Catherine had quietly arranged for the staff to have their own opportunities to say goodbye. She understood that we weren't just employees, Mrs. Henderson would remember. We were people who loved Her Majesty too. The princess made sure we all had our moment. As the days shortened and autumn settled over the British countryside, the atmosphere at Windsor Castle grew increasingly heavy with unspoken understanding. Medical equipment had been discreetly moved into the Queen's private apartments. Family members who lived abroad had begun making quiet travel arrangements. The machinery of succession planning, dormant for so long, had begun to turn with careful precision. Through it all, Catherine found herself thinking not just about the loss of a beloved family member, but about what this transition would mean for her own life and that of her children. William would move one step closer to the throne that had always been his destiny. Their children would inherit new titles and new responsibilities. The life they had carefully built, with its delicate balance of royal duty and family privacy, would shift in ways both subtle and profound. The Queen, ever perceptive, had sensed Catherine's concerns during one of their final conversations. "Change is never easy," she had said, reaching out to squeeze Catherine's hand with surprising strength. "But I've watched you these past years, my dear. You have something that can't be taught or inherited. You have the heart for this work. Trust that." Those words echoed in Catherine's mind as she prepared for what everyone sensed would be one of their last meaningful exchanges. The Queen's condition had deteriorated over the weekend, and while she was still conscious and able to communicate, her energy was clearly waning. The family had been told to prepare themselves. Catherine chose her outfit carefully that morning, selecting a simple navy dress that the Queen had once complimented her on. She pinned to her lapel the small sapphire brooch that had been a Christmas gift from the Queen 2 years earlier, a gesture of connection that felt important even if no one else might notice it. As she made her way through the corridors of Windsor Castle, Catherine passed portraits of monarchs and consorts spanning centuries. She found herself wondering what advice Queen Victoria might have given about losing a beloved partner, what Queen Mary might have said about the duties that come with unexpected grief, or what the Queen Mother might have whispered about finding strength when the world is watching. The door to the Queen's private sitting room stood slightly ajar, and Catherine could hear the soft murmur of conversation from within. William was already there, she realized, along with King Charles and Queen Camilla. This would be a family gathering, but she knew that even in the Queen's final days, every moment was precious and carefully measured. Taking a deep breath, Catherine knocked gently and entered the room that had become so familiar to her over the past weeks. The Queen was propped up in her favorite armchair by the window, wrapped in a soft cashmere shawl that had been a gift from the people of Scotland. Despite her obvious frailty, her eyes still held the spark of intelligence and warmth that had characterized her entire reign. "Catherine, my dear," the Queen's voice was soft but welcoming. "Come sit with us." As Catherine took her place beside William, she felt the weight of the moment settling around them all. This was more than a family gathering. It was a passing of torches, a sharing of final wisdom, and the beginning of a farewell that would soon capture the hearts of millions around the world. But for now, in this quiet room filled with afternoon sunlight and the presence of those who love her most, Queen Elizabeth II was simply a grandmother sharing precious time with her family. The conversation that followed would remain private, but its effects would ripple outward in the days to come, ultimately leading to a moment of such genuine emotion and human connection that it would remind the world why the British royal family had endured for over 1,000 years. It wasn't because of tradition or ceremony or constitutional necessity. It was because, at its heart, it remained what it had always been, a family bound together by love, loss, duty, and hope for the future. Outside the windows of Windsor Castle, life continued its normal rhythm. Tourists gathered at the gates, hoping for a glimpse of royalty. Photographers waited patiently for any sign of news, and the people of Britain went about their daily lives largely unaware that history was unfolding just beyond their view. Soon, the whole world would witness a moment that would define not just a royal transition, but a new understanding of what modern monarchy could be when it chose to lead with both strength and vulnerability, dignity, and humanity. The call came at 4:47 in the morning on a Thursday in September. Catherine was already awake, having spent a restless night thinking about the previous day's visit with the Queen. The sound of William's phone buzzing insistently on the bedside table sent a chill through her even before he answered it. Yes. William's voice was immediately alert, the tone of someone who had been expecting difficult news. Catherine watched his face in the dim light filtering through their bedroom curtains, seeing the moment when anticipation became reality. "We'll be there within the hour," William said quietly, ending the call. He turned to Catherine, and she could see in his eyes what he couldn't quite bring himself to say. The Queen was dying. The next few hours passed in a blur of careful coordination and barely controlled emotion. Palace staff moved with practiced efficiency, implementing plans that had been years in the making but never hoped to be used. Cars were dispatched to collect family members from across the country and continent. Private jets were quietly prepared for flights from Scotland and beyond. Catherine found herself moving through the morning routine with her children as if it were any other day, while simultaneously preparing for something unprecedented. George, Charlotte, and Louis would need to be told about their great-grandmother's condition, but the decision was made to wait until after school, when the family could be together and unhurried. The drive to Windsor Castle felt both eternal and impossibly short. Catherine sat beside William in the back of their car, watching the familiar countryside roll past and thinking about how this same landscape would soon witness a moment that would change everything. They had made this journey countless times for family dinners, Christmas celebrations, and informal visits. Today, they were traveling to say goodbye. Arriving at the castle, Catherine was struck by how normal everything appeared from the outside. Tourists still gathered at the gates. The Union Jack still flew proudly from the round tower, and the guards maintained their posts with characteristic precision. But inside, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation and sorrow. Family members had been gathering throughout the morning. Princess Anne had driven down from Scotland, having been the closest to the Queen's bedside when her condition had worsened overnight. Prince Andrew and Prince Edward had arrived with their families, their usual busy schedules abandoned in favor of this final vigil. The Queen's private apartments had been transformed into something approaching a hospital room, but efforts had been made to maintain the warmth and personality of the space. Her favorite photographs still lined the tables. Her beloved corgis had been allowed to remain nearby, and fresh flowers from the castle gardens filled the room with gentle fragrance. Catherine had expected to find chaos, but instead discovered an atmosphere of profound calm. The Queen, though clearly very weak, was conscious and aware of her surroundings. She had insisted on being helped into her favorite chair by the window, where she could see the garden she had loved for so many decades. "She's been asking for each of you individually," King Charles explained quietly to William and Catherine as they entered the room. "She wants to have a moment with everyone." The reality of actually losing the Queen had always seemed theoretical, despite her advanced age. She had been such a constant presence in British life, and indeed in world affairs, that imagining life without her felt like trying to picture the sun failing to rise. Now, faced with the immediacy of her final hours, Catherine felt the weight of history settling around them all. When Catherine's turn came to sit privately with the Queen, she was surprised by how peaceful the moment felt. The Queen's hand, though frail, was warm as Catherine gently held it. "I want to thank you," the Queen said, her voice soft but clear, "for the joy you've brought to William and to our family. You've exceeded every hope I had when you first came to us." Catherine felt tears threatening, but managed to keep her voice steady. "You've been such a wonderful grandmother to me. You made me feel welcome from the very first day." The Queen smiled, an expression that transformed her tired face. "The monarchy will be in good hands with you, and William, trust your instincts, my dear. They've served you well so far." They spoke quietly for nearly 20 minutes, sharing memories and discussing hopes for the children's futures. The Queen wanted to hear about Charlotte's recent piano recital, George's progress with his writing lessons, and Louis's latest amusing observations about royal life. "They'll remember you," Catherine assured her, "not just as their great-grandmother the Queen, but as someone who loved them just for being themselves." "That's all any of us can hope for," the Queen replied. "To be remembered for love, not just for duty." As evening approached, the extended family gathered in the Queen's sitting room. Medical staff had warned that time was growing short, but the Queen had rallied enough to spend these final hours surrounded by those she loved most. It was during this gathering that Catherine witnessed something that would stay with her forever. The Queen, despite her obvious exhaustion, made an effort to connect individually with each person in the room. She had specific words for each grandchild, special memories to share with each of her children, and personal messages for the spouses who had joined the family over the years. When she spoke to Catherine and William together, her words were about their future responsibilities, but also about their marriage and their role as parents. "The crown can be a lonely burden," she told them, "but you two have something I always admired in my own parents. You're true partners. Don't let duty overshadow that partnership. The monarchy needs it." As the sun began to set over Windsor Great Park, painting the Queen's apartments in golden light, the family settled into what they all understood would be their final evening together. Conversation was quiet and often punctuated by comfortable silences. Stories were shared about happier times, about family holidays and state occasions, about private jokes and cherished traditions. Catherine found herself thinking about the 3 young children at home, probably finishing their homework and getting ready for bed, unaware that their great-grandmother was spending her final hours thinking of them and their futures. Tomorrow, they would wake up to a changed world, one where their great-grandmother lived only in memory, and their father had moved one step closer to a throne that sometimes seemed both inevitable and impossibly distant. The Queen dozed intermittently as the evening progressed, but each time she awakened, she seemed to take comfort in seeing her family still gathered around her. Her breathing had become labored, and medical staff monitored her condition carefully, but there was no sense of panic or urgency. This was a peaceful passing, surrounded by love and occurring in a place she had called home for most of her adult life. Just before midnight, the Queen awakened for what would be the final time. Her eyes moved around the room, taking in each beloved face one last time. When her gaze fell on William and Catherine, she managed one final smile, an expression of profound contentment and love. King Charles moved to sit beside his mother, taking her hand gently. "We're all here, Mama," he said softly. "We love you." The Queen's response was barely audible, but those closest to her would later say she whispered, "Thank you for everything." At 12:37 a.m. on Friday, September 8th, Queen Elizabeth II passed away peacefully at Windsor Castle, surrounded by her family. The longest reign in British history had come to an end, but the love that had sustained both the woman and the monarch would live on in the hearts of those she left behind. In the immediate aftermath, as medical formalities were completed and official notifications began to be made, the family maintained their vigil in the Queen's apartments. There would be time later for the machinery of succession to take over, for official announcements and ceremonial preparations. For now, they were simply a family grieving the loss of someone irreplaceable. Catherine found herself thinking not of the grand state funeral that would follow, not of the constitutional implications or the media coverage that would consume the world's attention. Instead, she thought of an elderly woman who had shown her such kindness, who had shared her wisdom with such generosity, and who had loved her family with a depth that transcended duty or tradition. The embrace that would soon capture the world's attention was still hours away, but its foundation was being laid in these quiet moments of grief and remembrance. As Catherine and William prepared to leave Windsor Castle in the early hours of the morning, to return home to their children and begin the process of explaining loss to young hearts, they carried with them not just sorrow, but a profound appreciation for the woman they had been privileged to love and to serve alongside. The Queen was gone, but the value she had embodied, the love she had shared, and the example she had set would continue to guide the family she had cherished. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a new era, but tonight belonged to memory, to gratitude, and to the enduring power of love to sustain us through even the most difficult transitions. The news of Queen Elizabeth II's passing was announced to the world at 6:30 p.m. on September 8th, though she had actually died nearly 18 hours earlier. The delay had allowed the family time to process their grief privately and ensure that all immediate family members were informed personally before the public announcement. Catherine and William had spent the day at home with their children, explaining the loss of their great-grandmother in gentle terms that 9-year-old George, 7-year-old Charlotte, and 4-year-old Louis could understand. The conversations had been heartbreaking and beautiful in equal measure, as the children processed the reality that someone they loved would no longer be there for bedtime stories, holiday celebrations, or quiet afternoon visits. Charlotte had cried quietly, asking if great-granny was in pain. Louis had wondered if she would still be able to wave at him from heaven. George, already understanding more about his family's public role, had asked solemnly if this meant his papa would be king now, and what that would mean for all of them. "It means we'll miss her very much," Catherine had explained, "but we'll also try to live in a way that would make her proud. She taught us so much about kindness and service and thinking of others before ourselves." As the family faced their first evening in a world without the Queen, William's phone began buzzing constantly with messages from world leaders, family friends, and palace officials. The machinery of succession and state funeral planning was already in motion, but there was also a more immediate concern about how to help the children process their grief while managing the inevitable public attention. The decision was made to maintain the children's normal routines as much as possible over the next few days. They would attend school, participate in their regular activities, and spend time with friends. However, they would also gradually be included in some of the ceremonial aspects of saying goodbye to their great-grandmother in ways appropriate for their ages. The following days passed in a strange mixture of private grief and public duty. While the family mourned personally, they also had to participate in the countless ceremonial requirements that follow the death of a monarch. There were meetings with government officials, coordination with Commonwealth countries, and detailed planning for what would become the largest state funeral in modern British history. Catherine found herself playing multiple roles during this period. She was a grieving family member, a mother helping her children process loss, and increasingly a senior member of the royal family, stepping up to support both the new King Charles III and the institution itself during this period of transition. Her natural grace during public appearances in the days following the Queen's death drew widespread praise. She seemed to strike exactly the right balance between personal sorrow and royal dignity, showing genuine emotion while maintaining the composure necessary for her position. Photos of her during these appearances captured something rarely seen in royal photography: authentic human feeling in formal circumstances. But it was her private interactions during this period that truly demonstrated the depth of her character. Palace staff would later recall how she made time to check on employees who had worked closely with the Queen, understanding that they too were grieving the loss of someone they had served and respected for decades. She organized informal memorial gatherings for staff, ensuring that people at every level of the royal household felt their grief was acknowledged and valued. Mrs. Angela Kelly, the Queen's personal dresser and wardrobe advisor, was particularly moved by Catherine's thoughtfulness during this period. The princess understood that we weren't just losing our employer, Mrs. Kelly would later write. We were losing someone who had been the center of our working lives for years, sometimes decades. She made sure we felt seen and supported during that difficult time. Catherine also played a crucial role in helping other family members, particularly the younger royals, navigate the complex emotional landscape of public grief. She had learned hard lessons about media attention during her own early years in the royal family, and she used that experience to help shield and support others who were struggling with the intersection of personal loss and public duty. As the date of the state funeral approached, plans were finalized for what would be a ceremony watched by billions of people around the world. Leaders from every continent would attend, along with representatives from organizations and charities that the Queen had supported throughout her reign. The logistics were staggering, but the emotional weight was even greater. The night before the funeral, Catherine found herself unable to sleep. She walked through their home at Adelaide Cottage, checking on each of the children and thinking about the next day. George would be attending the funeral as the eldest child and future heir. Charlotte and Louis would remain at home, judged still too young for such a solemn and lengthy ceremony. William found her in their sitting room at nearly 2 a.m., staring out at the garden where their children played every day, where normal family life continued despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding it. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling beside her on the sofa. "I keep thinking about what she said," Catherine replied. "About trusting our instincts, about being true partners. Tomorrow feels like the beginning of something entirely different for all of us." William nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The Queen's death had moved them all one step closer to their ultimate destinies. He was now heir to the throne. She would one day be Queen Consort, and their children would grow up with even more public attention and responsibility than they had previously faced. "She believed in us," William said quietly, "in what we could do together. I think tomorrow is about honoring that belief." The day of the funeral dawned gray and somber, with a light rain that seemed fitting for the occasion. Catherine dressed carefully in black, wearing pearls that had belonged to the Queen and a small brooch that had been a personal gift during happier times. Westminster Abbey filled with the most extraordinary gathering of world leaders, royalty, and distinguished guests in modern history. But for Catherine, walking into that ancient building where she had been married 11 years earlier, the focus was entirely on celebrating and honoring the life of a woman who had become such an important figure in her own life. The service itself was a masterpiece of royal ceremony, combining ancient traditions with personal touches that reflected the Queen's character and values. Music that she had loved, readings that had special meaning to her, and prayers that reflected her deep faith all came together in a ceremony that felt both historically significant and deeply personal. Catherine sat between William and their son George, conscious that cameras were capturing every moment for posterity, but focused primarily on helping her family navigate this profound experience. George, despite his young age, conducted himself with remarkable dignity throughout the lengthy service, understanding instinctively the solemnity of the occasion. As the service concluded and the Queen's coffin was carried from Westminster Abbey, Catherine felt the weight of finality settling over them all. This was truly goodbye, the end of an era not just for the nation but for their family. The grandmother who had guided and supported them through so many personal milestones was now truly gone. The procession to Windsor Castle, where the Queen would be laid to rest beside her beloved husband Prince Philip, provided one final opportunity for the public to pay their respects. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets, many of them crying openly as the funeral cortege passed by. But it was at Windsor Castle, during the more private committal service for family and close friends, that the most powerful moment of the entire day would occur. As the Queen's coffin was lowered into the royal vault, as the final prayers were said, and the last hymn sung, Catherine and William found themselves standing at what felt like a threshold between their previous life and whatever would come next. In that moment, surrounded by family, but also facing an uncertain future, William turned to his wife with an expression of such vulnerability and love that it seemed to capture everything they had shared and everything they still hoped to experience together. The embrace that followed would last only seconds, but its impact would resonate far beyond that chapel, far beyond that day, reaching into the hearts of millions of people who recognized in that simple gesture something profound about love, loss, and the courage required to keep moving forward even when the world is watching and the stakes feel impossibly high. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new questions about how to honor the past while building a future worthy of the trust that had been placed in them. But for now, in that moment of shared grief and mutual support, Catherine and William had reminded everyone watching that even princes and princesses, even future kings and queens, sometimes needed simply to hold each other and remember that love, not duty, was the foundation upon which everything else was built. The embrace lasted no more than 15 seconds, but in those fleeting moments, something extraordinary happened. As William and Catherine held each other in St. George's Chapel following the committal service, their genuine emotion cut through decades of royal protocol and touched something fundamental in the human experience. Photographers captured the moment from every conceivable angle, but what made the images so powerful wasn't their technical excellence or composition. It was the undeniable authenticity of two people finding comfort in each other during one of the most difficult moments of their lives, while simultaneously carrying the weight of representing an entire nation's grief. Catherine's hand rested gently on William's shoulder as he briefly lowered his head, the strain of the day and the weeks leading up to it finally showing. Her other hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the unconscious familiarity of a couple who had weathered many storms together. For those brief seconds, they weren't the Prince and Princess of Wales. They were simply a husband and wife saying goodbye to someone they had loved deeply. The gesture was captured not just by official photographers, but by television cameras broadcasting live to a global audience estimated at over 4 billion people. Social media exploded within minutes, not with criticism about protocol or speculation about royal succession, but with messages of recognition and appreciation from people around the world who saw in that moment something they recognized from their own experiences with loss and love. "They're just like us," wrote one viewer from Australia. "They need each other the same way we all do when we're hurting." A grandmother from Canada posted, "I cried watching them. You could see how much they love the Queen and how much they love each other." The images circled the globe within hours, appearing on front pages from London to Tokyo, from New York to Nairobi. Editorial writers and commentators struggled to articulate what made the moment so compelling, but readers and viewers needed no explanation. In an age of manufactured moments and carefully scripted public appearances, here was something that couldn't be staged or planned. Genuine human emotion at its most vulnerable and beautiful. Back at Windsor Castle, as the family gathered for a private reception following the committal service, Catherine found herself overwhelmed by the response to their moment of grief. Palace communication staff showed her some of the initial media coverage and social media reaction, and she was startled by the positive, almost protective tone of most of the coverage. "People are calling it the most human moment they've ever seen from the royal family," one aide explained. "They're not criticizing the emotion, they're celebrating it." Catherine had grown up in the age of social media and constant scrutiny. She knew how quickly public sentiment could turn, how a gesture could be misinterpreted or twisted to fit whatever narrative was currently fashionable. The overwhelmingly positive reaction to their private moment of grief was both touching and surprising. William, meanwhile, was grappling with his own complex emotions about the public nature of their private grief. As someone who had lost his mother at a young age, under the most public circumstances imaginable, he was acutely sensitive to the intrusion that came with royal life. But the reaction to their embrace seemed different somehow, more respectful and understanding than the often harsh judgment he had experienced in the past. "Maybe people are starting to understand," he told Catherine that evening as they finally returned home to their children. "Maybe they're seeing that we're not just playing roles. This is our real life, our real family, our real feelings." The children had been waiting for them at Adelaide Cottage, having watched portions of the funeral on television with their nanny and close family friends. George understood more than his younger siblings about what the day had meant, both personally and historically. Charlotte and Louis knew mainly that Mama and Papa had been very sad today, saying goodbye to great-granny one last time. As Catherine tucked each child in a bed that night, she found herself thinking about the Queen's final words to her about trusting her instincts and remembering that people needed to believe in their leaders as real people, not just symbols. The reaction to their moment of shared grief seemed to confirm that wisdom in ways the Queen herself might not have anticipated. In the days that followed, letters began arriving at Kensington Palace from around the world. Unlike the usual formal correspondence that came with royal life, these were deeply personal messages from ordinary people sharing their own experiences with loss and expressing gratitude for the example William and Catherine had set. A widow from Scotland wrote, "Seeing you two comfort each other reminded me that it's okay to need support, even when you're supposed to be strong for everyone else." A young couple from India shared, "We lost our grandmother last year, and watching you honor yours with such love gives us hope about how to carry forward her memory." An elderly man from the United States wrote simply, "Thank you for showing us that love is stronger than protocol." Catherine read many of these letters personally, moved by the connection that their moment of vulnerability had created with people they would never meet, but whose lives had somehow been touched by their experience. It was a reminder of the unique platform that came with their position, but also of the responsibility to use that platform authentically and meaningfully. The embrace also marked a turning point in how the couple approached their public duties in the months that followed. They had always been more relaxed and informal than previous generations of royals, but the response to their genuine emotion during the Queen's funeral seemed to give them permission to be even more authentic in their interactions with the public. During subsequent appearances, they were more likely to acknowledge their own feelings, to show genuine reactions to moving situations, and to connect with people on a more human level. The carefully maintained distance that had traditionally characterized royal interactions began to give way to a more accessible and relatable approach. 6 months after the funeral, Catherine found herself reflecting on that moment during a visit to a hospice in Wales. As she spoke with families facing their own experiences with loss, she realized how much she had learned from the public reaction to their private grief. "The Queen was right," she told William that evening. "People don't just want us to be perfect symbols. They want to know that we understand what they're going through, that we're not above the experiences that define all human life." The embrace had become more than just a moment of personal comfort during a difficult day. It had evolved into a symbol of a more modern, more human approach to royal service, one that acknowledged emotion as a source of strength rather than weakness, connection as more important than distance, and authenticity as more valuable than perfection. A year later, as they attended their first state funeral as senior working royals, Catherine and William found themselves once again managing the intersection of private grief and public duty. But now they had the confidence that came from knowing their authentic emotions were not just acceptable, but valued by the people they served. The Queen's legacy lived on not just in the constitutional changes and ceremonial tradition she had established, but in the permission she had given them to be real people in extraordinary circumstances. Her final gift to them had been the wisdom to trust their instincts, and their embrace had proven that those instincts could guide them toward a form of service that was both deeply traditional and thoroughly modern. As Catherine often told the story in later years, the embrace that moved millions wasn't planned or calculated. It was simply two people who loved each other, finding strength in that love during one of the most difficult days of their lives. That it resonated so deeply with people around the world said less about their unique circumstances than about the universal nature of love, loss, and the human need for connection. The moment had lasted only seconds, but its impact would influence how William and Catherine approached their roles for years to come, always remembering that the most powerful thing they could offer the people they served wasn't perfection, but humanity. In showing their genuine selves during their greatest sadness, they had inadvertently revealed the path toward a more meaningful and effective form of modern monarchy, one built on authenticity, empathy, and the enduring power of love to unite rather than divide. The farewell embrace had indeed been one to remember, not just for the royal family or the British public, but for anyone who had ever needed to find strength in love during their darkest moments. In that simple gesture, Catherine and William had reminded the world that even in the most formal circumstances, even under the brightest lights and heaviest scrutiny, the most important thing we can do is simply be there for each other.